Number 1. Melanie Alex, the woman who set fire to her own family. In the quiet province of Quebec, Canada, one case left investigators and the public deeply disturbed. It was the case of Melanie Alex, a woman whose name would later become associated with betrayal, manipulation, and unimaginable loss. Born in 1974, Melanie appeared, at least on the surface, to be an ordinary young woman trying to navigate life. But behind that image was a far darker story. By the age of 29, she had already been connected to the death of one of the most vulnerable people in her life, her own mother, and just 2 years later, tragedy would strike again. This time, the victim was her infant son. The pattern between both deaths would become impossible to ignore, and what investigators uncovered was chilling. It all began on January 31, 2001. A fire broke out inside a home in the small Quebec town of Lacadie. The house belonged to Francine Alex, Melanie's mother. By the time emergency crews arrived, the fire had already spread through several parts of the house. Inside, they found Francine dead. She had died from smoke inhalation. At first, it appeared to be a tragic house fire, but investigators quickly noticed something unusual. The fire had not started in just one place. It had been deliberately set in multiple locations. That immediately raised suspicion. Then came another disturbing discovery. Francine, who was wheelchair-bound and completely dependent on others for care, had been sedated before the fire. Tests later revealed the presence of oxazepam, a sleep-inducing medication. What made this discovery even more alarming was that the medication had been prescribed to Melanie herself. This was no accident. This was arson, and it was beginning to look like murder. Melanie tried to direct suspicion away from herself. She blamed her brother. She suggested that he may have had something to do with their mother's death. But investigators continued to examine the evidence. The more they looked, the less her story made sense. Still, the case did not fully close. Then, just 2 years later, history repeated itself. On May 12, 2003, another fire broke out, this time in Saint-Blaise-sur-Richelieu, and once again, the victim was someone completely defenseless. Melanie's 1-year-old son, Mathis Alex Leblanc. The similarities between the two cases were shocking. And just like her mother, the child had also been drugged with oxazepam. Just like the previous fire, this one had been started in multiple places. Investigators found evidence of fires set around chairs in the living room. There was also a fire fed by oil on the stovetop. The method was too familiar, too deliberate, too specific. Again, Melanie pointed fingers. This time, she blamed her ex-boyfriend Stéphane Leblanc, the father of the child. But detectives were no longer convinced. The same woman, the same drug, the same fire pattern, the same vulnerable victim. To investigators, this no longer looked like coincidence. It looked like a repeat. As the case moved forward, prosecutors built a powerful argument. They showed how both fires followed nearly identical methods. They highlighted how both victims had been sedated beforehand, and most importantly, they focused on Melanie's own words. During questioning, she had reportedly made statements admitting that she gave the medication and started the fire. Later, during trial, she changed her story. She claimed the confession had been forced. She said detectives pressured her into saying things she did not mean, but prosecutors were prepared. They confronted her with video evidence from the interrogation. The jury watched, and what they saw did not help her case. Throughout the trial, Melanie portrayed herself as a victim. She spoke about abuse in her past. She claimed she had suffered mistreatment from family members and from former partners. She described a life filled with trauma. But prosecutors argued that this was another attempt to shift blame and gain sympathy. One of the most unsettling pieces of evidence was a will she had written before her son's death. In it, she reportedly requested to be buried with her children. This was before the child had died. To the prosecution, this suggested premeditation, a sign that she had already imagined or even planned what was to come. Perhaps the most heartbreaking moment came when details emerged about the fire involving her son. Melanie described entering the smoke-filled room. She claimed she reached toward the crib, but then, according to her own account, she turned away. She left, and the child was left behind. She later referred to it as a lost cause. For many following the case, that statement was impossible to forget. The jury did not take long to reach a decision. They found Melanie Alex guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The victims were her own mother and her infant son, 2 people who had depended on her, 2 people who could not defend themselves. The court also found her guilty in relation to another attempted murder charge connected to the wider investigation. On December 22, 2005, the sentence was delivered. Melanie Alex was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. For the families involved, it was a moment of painful closure. Her brother, Francois Alex, later told reporters that he was not surprised. According to him, Melanie had shown manipulative and dangerous behavior since childhood. He described her as someone willing to do anything. Meanwhile, Stéphane Leblanc, the father who lost his son, watched as the sentence was read. Seeing her reaction in court gave him a sense of justice, but nothing could bring back his child. To this day, the case of Melanie Alex remains one of the most disturbing family murder cases in Canadian criminal history, not just because of the deaths, but because of the repeated pattern. The same method, the same drug, the same fire, the same betrayal, a mother, a grandmother, both gone, both unable to escape, both trusted the same person, and both paid with their lives. Melanie Alex's story is one of fire, deception, and devastating loss. A case that continues to haunt those who remember it. Number 2. Catherine Andrus. Some crimes are shocking because of how violent they are. Others are disturbing because of how carefully they were planned. The case of Catherine Andrus was both. What happened in September 2009 left an entire family shattered and a community in disbelief. At the center of it was a woman who had spent 16 years living with the victim. To outsiders, they appeared to be a long-term couple trying to build a life together. But behind closed doors, serious financial problems and hidden lies were quietly building. Then, on the morning after her son's birthday, everything changed. A man was found dead in his own bed, and the person responsible was the woman who had shared that home with him for years. The victim was 53-year-old Michel Leblanc. On the morning of September 24, 2009, his body was discovered inside the bedroom of the family home. The discovery was made by Catherine's teenage son. He had just celebrated his 16th birthday the night before. Instead of preparing for a normal school day, he walked into a nightmare. Michel was lying in bed, lifeless. An autopsy later revealed the cause of death. He had been struck multiple times in the head with an aluminum baseball bat. The blows were severe. Investigators said there were at least 5 major strikes to the skull. Doctors later testified that any one of those blows could have been fatal on its own. This was not a momentary act. This was a sustained and brutal attack. At first, the scene appeared confusing. There were signs that suggested a possible break-in. Items seemed to be missing. The room looked disturbed. But experienced investigators quickly began to notice that something did not add up. The scene looked too arranged, too deliberate. Instead of evidence of an outside intruder, it appeared to be a staged crime scene. And soon, all attention turned toward Catherine Andrus. According to court findings, this was not a spontaneous act. It was planned. Before carrying out the attack, Catherine reportedly removed her clothing. The reason, prosecutors argued, was simple. She expected the attack to be bloody and wanted to avoid leaving obvious evidence on herself. That detail alone showed premeditation. After the killing, she cleaned herself up. She took a shower. She used paper towels to wipe down the scene. Then, in an attempt to continue the deception, she arranged the bedroom to make it look like someone had broken in and attacked Michel. But the lies did not stop there. She then left for work at Tim Hortons, acting as though nothing had happened. For investigators, that behavior would later become one of the most chilling parts of the case. A man had just been murdered in his own home, and the person responsible went to work as if it were an ordinary day. As detectives continued their investigation, more cracks appeared in Catherine's story. Items she claimed had been stolen were later found much closer than expected. Some valuables were discovered in her own van and locker. That immediately damaged the break-in theory. The missing wallet and other personal items were not gone because of a robbery. They had been moved. The scene had been staged. At first, Catherine presented herself as the grieving partner. She attended the funeral. She gave an emotional eulogy. To many people around her, she seemed heartbroken.